Hi, this is Tom Soane, and I just wanted to share a story with you about buying an investment property that needs a lease extension. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I've been talking with Joe over the last couple of days. Joe is buying a property at auction that needs a lease extension, and he's run into some difficulties, some legalities really, that I don't think enough people know about. I don't think the education is free enough and available enough for property investors to pick up this stuff. And it's important because it can cause some serious issues. So there's a few little pieces of information I'd like to share with you about this story and the solution to this story. So Joe bought a property at auction which required a lease extension. So look, the chances are if you're buying a place that needs a lease extension, you're going to get it at a good price. And that was the case here. Joe's picking this property up from auction and he's buying it for a good price. So well done, Joe, for finding the deal for first off. They're hard to find. Anyway, Joe was under the impression that the seller would complete a lease extension prior to completion. The seller was under the impression that they were simply going to apply for the lease extension prior to completion. So what does all that mean? Well, look, there's two ways that you could buy this property, and I'll use an example. If you're going to buy a property that's £100,000, but it does need a lease extension, and that lease extension is going to cost £10,000, you could either buy the property at £90,000 as it is, or you can buy the property for £100,000 and the seller completes the lease extension. Now, actually, that is the better route to get the seller to complete the lease extension, unless you can negotiate something better on the downside, on the ignore the lease extension and buy it for even cheaper. But in this case, Joe felt like the owner was going to be completing a lease extension prior to completion, and the owner thought they were just going to apply for the lease extension. Now, here's a couple of warnings. The seller's solicitor will act in the seller's best interest and not the buyer's, and Joe's finding this out right now. Getting close to completion, Joe realised that the lease extension hadn't been completed, and so did his lawyer. So they pushed for that. And the seller's lawyer came back to them and said, well, no, we've applied for the lease extension. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So Joe's lawyer, of course, then had to look into the legal pack from the auctioneer and the terms and conditions of this purchase, and found that it's a bit of a grey area. It doesn't specifically state that the current owner will complete a lease extension prior to completion. And so they're arguing that point. Now, of course they are. Their seller is their client. So you can't really knock them for acting in their client's best interests. But at the same time, this puts Joe in an awful situation. Because it's not 100% clear, I think Joe should fight that. I personally think Joe should fight that, because if there's any hint in that contract that the seller should have completed a lease extension, if it's implied that the seller should have completed a lease extension prior to completion, then I think that's grounds for pushing that point. And if you ever ended up in front of a judge arguing that same case, then I think, I might be wrong, but I think a judge would take that view of, well, it is implied. It might not clearly state it, but it's implied. So either Joe can pull out of that purchase without penalty, or the seller is obliged to complete that lease extension. Now that puts a few more difficulties in place. Obviously, if the completion date for the auction passes, then Joe's going to lose that property. And it might be such a good deal that he doesn't want to lose that property. Why would he want to lose that property? But on the flip side of all of that, I always think that, do you know what? I got some cracking information one time, and this clears all of this up. In fact, when I first started out as a property investor, one of the best pieces of information or advice I was given from Luke, cheers mate, was, it's just a pile of bricks. There's another pile of bricks down the road. Now, Joe, I'm not saying you should forget about this property because it sounds like it's a good deal. I would fight tooth and nail to keep that deal and make the seller complete that lease extension, or I would renegotiate the price. But first of all, you've got to find out how much that costs. to extend the lease. Now the process for that is you need a surveyor to come out. They'll then value the cost of the lease extension. That's going to cost you a few £100. Then the lawyer will need to redo the terms. That's probably going to cost you a bit of money. But if you could agree something with the seller to counteract, offset that cost against the purchase price, you're not looking to make any extra money out of this. You're just looking to get what you're entitled to and not spend any more money than you were supposed to spend. I think there could be a good deal in that for you, because it sounds like you've bought a good property there. If you can't, then if it was me, I would say, right, sod ya, I'm out. And then come after me for the penalty, because right here, this implies that you're going to complete that lease extension. And don't be afraid of that. And your lawyer should fight that corner for you too, because I think if you went in front of a judge, I think the judge would take leniency for you there. But at the same time, they might not. So you need to take a bit of advice on that anyway. But the points I'm trying to make, number one, well, the points I'm getting around to eventually. Number one, if you're buying a property that requires a lease extension and you're buying it as an investment, make sure the terms in the legal pack or in the contract state very clearly that the seller, the current seller, will complete a lease extension if that's the terms you've agreed to verbally. Secondly, if you can come to some sort of deal in that instance where you buy the property for a lower amount but you take on the risk of the lease extension, then you can ask the current seller to apply for the lease extension on your behalf. Otherwise, you will have to wait 2 years after the completed purchase before you can apply for the lease extension, and that will cost you more money. The other option is that you just negotiate deal of the century and you say, look, don't worry about it, I'll take care of everything, leave it with me, because actually I'm not going to sell this property. This isn't a flip, I'm going to keep hold of it. So I'll offer you a bit less and I'll take on all the risk of that lease extension, and I'll just renew it in 2 years' time when it comes to it. Then you might be able to get yourself a better deal, especially if you're going to rent this property out. Now, there's a couple of catches to that. That's the way to get the lowest purchase price. However, I don't know what the lease length is on that particular deal. But lenders, mortgage lenders, don't like properties that have less than 80 years on the lease. And okay, I understand that there are specialist lenders that will lend on properties that are below 80 years. Maybe you'll pay slightly more in interest, but depending on the purchase price, it's not going to make a huge difference to the monthly payments on the mortgage. Anyway, the reason they don't like that, by the way, is because if you think about it, if you've got a normal lease is 125 years, right? And if you've got 70 years left on this lease of the property that you're buying, then that lease has been around for 55 years. And 55 years ago, when that lease was written, assuming it was written 55 years ago, life was different. Things were different. Times were different. The economy was different. Rules and regulations and laws and legislation and processes and practices and systems and all of that sort of stuff was different. So that means the lease is going to have been written in different times. That's why mortgage lenders don't like those short leases. Also, there is obviously a cost involved in extending the lease. So again, lenders don't like that. If there are any associated costs or associated risks, mortgage lenders don't like it. So that's why they're tight on lending to properties or against properties that have less than 80 years. But that's not saying that it's impossible. And there are ways and means that you can borrow money, not necessarily from the traditional mortgage lenders, or raise finance in ways that will enable you to get this deal done. But that's a whole different video. What I'm trying to say is that there are deals to be done on properties that need lease extensions, as long as you know the risks, as long as you know what possibilities or opportunities there are and what dangers there are too. So look, I hope that helps. If you want my overall advice on all of this, Joe, you fight tooth and nail, mate, and I'll help you. But if you're looking at properties that need a lease extension, this is your chance to haggle and haggle and haggle and haggle, because the seller is going to find a much smaller market to be able to sell to if they've got a low lease. You are probably one of only a few people that are willing to buy it, which means if there's low demand, the price is low. So if you can find those property deals that have low demand because they're a little bit niche, a little bit special, a bit risky, a bit dangerous, then that's where you can really haggle hard. So I hope that helps. I don't know if it does. I'm just doing this to see if it does. So please let me know if you think this was helpful, or if you know anyone that could benefit from this. Let them know that I've done a video, and hopefully we'll try and help as many people as we can avoid situation that Joe has been. So Joe, if you don't mind, drop me a message to let me know how you're getting on, keep me posted, and whatever solution you come out with, I think it'd be really good to share that with other people too. Maybe we can do an interview, something like that, so we can talk about your story, what you learnt, what the risks were, and what you found out. Anyway, speak to you all again soon. Let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about or explain that you think would be helpful to other people, property investors, landlords, anything like that. I'm happy to share my opinion, happy to share my knowledge. If I can help people, then I will. Then we can all help each other. We're all landlords, we're all property investors, we're all in the same boat. We should join together and link up and unite, so that we can make sure we've got up-to-date information and help and support and guidance. So I've waffled on enough. That's 11.5 minutes that you're never going to get back, but hopefully one or two of you will have found that useful. So take care, everyone. I'm off home, glass of wine, and speak to you soon.